So some of you may have noticed that many of the things I talk about on this channel are in fact from Japan. This is true, and one question that I'd like to imagine I get asked is, do you have an understanding of the Japanese language? I've been immersed in Japanese culture for the past 5 years, so I've reached a point of the language where I can confidently say, well, I mean, I'm looking into lessons, you know. I've made this guide for all of you who want to learn the language, but at the moment know basically nothing. Hence why the first step of my guide is Step 1. Know basically nothing. So, you're in a position where you have effectively no knowledge of Japan. All you know is that there's a country that's like China, but they have this thing called sushi. You've heard that sushi is nice, but you've also heard that it's basically raw rice strapped to a fish with a piece of seaweed, and that frankly sounds minging. You eventually come to understand that the capital of this country is someplace named Tokyo, and you understand that it's a global electronics hub after your viewing of the Oscar-worthy classic Cars 2. However, a friend eventually introduces you to the hardcore substance known as anime. From there, you can move on to step number 2. Step 2. Being that dickhead that watches anime subbed. You start watching anime, but the default setting on Netflix is watching it subbed, and you're too lazy to change it back to the English version. You eventually decide that your anime watching career should be much like your COD Warzone career. You will never see any dubs. You decide that this is probably better than the dub anyway, because all the dub acting is way too over the top and nothing how actual English people talk. This is, of course, without the knowledge that anime voice acting is nothing how Japanese people talk, so you have effectively become the same as that person who believes a restaurant is automatically more fancy if everything's written in French. For the next couple of years, you will be maturing your knowledge, such as learning that the word hentai directly translates to pervert, insulting to the audience, but accurate nonetheless. You have a basic understanding, so now is the perfect time to start learning the language for real. And what better vehicle to use than Step 3. Duolingo. Duolingo is that language learning website that your school had you set up an account in, only for it to turn out that this was intended for first-time learners of the language, not students who had been studying it for the past 3 years. However, one day your friend asks you to recommend them an anime because they are in fact trying to learn Japanese on Duolingo. Good for them. But you've carved out a niche in your social group by speaking broken Japanese, and frankly, you don't want anyone else in that group to overtake you, so you get back into your account and start up the Japanese course. Immediately, it dawns on you there is a slight problem, because Japan doesn't use real letters, but instead funny little pictures. And on top of that, they have 3 kinds of funny little picture. The first kind of funny little picture to exist is kanji, which are Chinese funny little pictures that Japan adopted. Then there's hiragana, which is when Japan tried to make its own funny little pictures, and they each cover a syllable. Then we have katakana, which is basically hiragana, but for foreign words. That sounded kind of racist. Throughout your time learning Japanese on Duolingo, you will only get to the stage where you learn hiragana and a wee bit of katakana, because Duolingo is a bastard that forces you to repeat entire sections just to make sure that you understand. Step 3. Duolingo. Duolingo is that language learning website that your school had you set up an account in, only for it to turn out that this was intended for first-time learners of the language. You'll learn that the word desu goes on the end of each sentence and roughly means it is. So, for example, if someone asks, what's the deal with this otaku without ideas fella, the response would be, kare wa hentai desu, which would translate to, pervert he is. This is in fact what inspired Yoda, since Star Wars takes a lot of influence from Japan, such as the lightsabers being inspired by katanas, Darth Vader's outfit looking like samurai armor, and Anakin and Padme's relationship basically being that of a Shota and an One-san. Anakin? More like Ara-Arakin? But anyway, I've got a bit distracted. What's the section that I'm talking about now? Step 4. Getting distracted. At least in the UK, modern foreign languages such as Spanish, French and German are taught in a cycle. They will introduce vocabulary to students, then they will use that to encourage them to consume more of the culture, and from that they learn more language and then they consume more of the culture, and it forms a beneficiary cycle. Self-teaching yourself in Japanese, however, is a little different. You consume shitloads of culture, learn a couple of words of new vocabulary, then consume more culture, just assume that it's the same as learning new vocabulary, and at this point we have a cycle so unbalanced it's being shown to school children as part of their bicycle safety courses. And it doesn't help that your relationship with Duolingo has gone beyond tsundere at this point and is now just bordering on domestic abuse. So you decide, bugger this, I'll just learn from anime. But at points you decide to get a bit lax. You know that 95-hour, fully VA'd JRPG that could provide you with a lot of Japanese vocab? I'll just have it in English. You then spend the next 2 years like this and decide that you'll just go back to learning once you've got a lot of free time on your hands, whenever that may be. Huh. Well, I guess I'll get started with Step 5. Rosetta Stone. Rosetta Stone is a language learning program named after that thing the Egyptians did, which was like an even shitter version of Google Translate. This will use a variety of learning methods, such as reading tasks, listening tasks, grammar tasks, and speaking tasks. This means that you will have to use a microphone for some tasks, and much like SoundCloud, if you want to succeed, then you have to mumble. Sensei wa watashi ni hon wo kukimashita. One thing you must do is download it onto your old laptop. You know, the one that overheats after 2 minutes, but you still hang on to it because there's a porn file on there that's too large to transfer. So every time you want to learn some Japanese, you have to spend 5 minutes wiring it up, and then do about 2 lessons, because any more will mean that it'll start making noises like Pathfinder trying to reenact the gay porn scream. We don't need visuals for that. But given that it's such a long process, I'm sure you can maybe do it once every few days. I mean, it's not like you'll forget about it or anything. Step 6. Getting distracted again. Sometimes you realise that you haven't finished Persona 5, so you go and finish that. Then you realise that you have the original Last of Us downloaded onto your PS4, and you want to at least experience what this franchise was like before it shit the bed, so you go and play that. Then you realise you haven't watched any Fate, so you go and watch Fate Zero. Then you realise you should be continuing with the Monogatari franchise, so you do. However, you have a miniature epiphany when you're watching Monogatari again, a series that is built on a foundation of Japanese wordplay. You start to think back. Perhaps I messed this up. I love this series, but there's something I could be doing that can boost my enjoyment even more. And that's a deepened understanding of the language that they use. And that's when you realise you should have been putting more time into one of those previous steps instead of getting distracted. Step 7. Just go back to watching anime. What? Where else are you going to hear such quintessential Japanese phrases as papara toyu waka desu? Which translates to, your head is papara brain. Such beautiful language.